It's time for the full review of the 2023 TM EN300 ES FI2T two-stroke. It's right here. So people have been emailing me forever to do a review on this bike. These bikes are handmade. It's an Italian-made motorcycle, and there's a lot of people that have had these over the years and wanted me to do a review, and they ranted and raved about it. And then also, it's a pretty rare bike here in the US. I hadn't ever seen one until I went and bought this one at the dealer up that is near me. And here's what I'll say, because a lot of times you guys say, hey, these reviews are too long, just get to the point. So here's the point that I would boil it down to, and then we can elaborate on this later. I look at this as not a home run, but it's a solid triple. If we're talking baseball terms, so a home run would be boom, we knocked it out of the park. But a triple is still an amazing hit. Hardly ever anybody gets triples. And a triple means that you're gonna basically score with the very next batter. So I should say that if you're watching this before the end of June 2023, you can enter to win this bike by going to my website right now at dirtbikechannel.com. Get your entries to win this bike and a KTM that I'm giving away. But let's get into the full review right now. This is an incredible motorcycle, especially for what it is. They're very expensive. I paid more for this than I've paid for basically any dirt bike, or as much. They're very, very expensive. It is also interesting though that they can actually make the bike, because they're making like a fraction of these as compared to like KTM. So they're doing it at a very, very similar cost to like a KTM or a Husky or a Gas, but there's a lot less of these things. So it's not a home run, but there's a lot of really good things to mention here. And I think the biggest reason why I would say it's not a home run is I couldn't quite figure out what the designers of this bike have in mind. And here's what I'm talking about. The way that the bike feels as far as geometry and the frame and the motor, the characteristics of the motor, it feels like it's meant to go slow, like do slower, more enduro style stuff. Hard enduro, soft enduro, this type of thing. But the valving on the fork and the shock is telling me it's meant to go fast. This fork is too stiff to do enduro stuff. It's too stiff for most average trail riders like a guy like me, and I think the shock is a little bit too stiff as well. So you made a motor that's like ready to grunt and go slow, and a frame that's ready to grunt and go slow and do enduro stuff and do, you know, tight woods things, but your fork is like cross country. And that's why, one of the biggest reasons why I'd say it's not a knock out of the park as far as a home run. So that's just something to kind of mention here that I think is a little bit confusing with what this bike has been designed to do. Let me tell you the bike that this most resembles as far as how I feel when I'm on the bike, and it's a Sherco. The Shercos are French made, this is Italian made, but the bikes feel very, very similar, and a lot of that has to do with just the rider cockpit. I feel like my hands and my feet are fairly close together on the TM EN300, as well as what I felt on the Shercos. Another thing is this has a pretty flat foot peg. The foot pegs come out flat with hardly any upward camber, similar to the Shercos, but I do feel like I am just a little bit more cramped on these things. So and I'm 6 feet tall, if you're 5'10", 5'11", even 5'8", 5'9", it'll probably feel a little bit more comfortable to you. If you're 6'2", you may feel a little bit cramped. Now, part of that is because on the particular triple clamps that I have, these are some super nice triple clamps, but you can't move the bars forward at all. I'm told that there are other triple clamps where you can move them forward. You've got some different positions that you can put this in. But for me, I ended up just kind of rolling my bars forward a little bit, more than I would normally do on another bike. I like them pretty neutral, but I roll the bars forward just a smidge, and that opened up my rider triangle just a little bit. But that is something that I would say is, if you're 6'4", you're gonna probably feel fairly cramped on this for whatever reason. Another thing that I noticed, we've got a Brembo clutch up here on this guy, and I'll get into the brakes later, but the Brembo clutch on this thing, it's a stiffer pull. I don't know if it's because of the master cylinder or if it's because of the clutch springs in this bike, but it's a fairly stiff pull compared to a lot of the other two-strokes that I've got. Specifically, I've got a couple other KTMs in here, like a KTM 300 XCW over here. Supposedly it's the same clutch master cylinder, but it's much harder to pull. This feels more like a 450 clutch, like a 450 4-stroke clutch, where it's got super stiff springs in there. So I don't know if that's because I don't know what that is, but I do notice that a lot of times if I'm using one finger, which I try to do, I end up having to use two fingers on this thing as my hand gets fatigued when I'm going through, covering the clutch and doing some of that stuff. Here's something else that is kind of interesting. So it's got an electronic power valve. Now I should say right now, the motor is incredible. The motor on this thing, it grunts, it lugs, it is guttural. It has this amazing sound to it that sounds super mean, especially when you've been riding some of these other bikes like a Japanese two-stroke or the Austrian two-strokes or whatever. This thing sounds really mean. I love the sound of it. I love the feeling that it has, and it's got this it's a throttle body fuel injection that is oil injected. I'll get into that later, but the bike runs really, really great as long as you let the power valve go through its cycle. So I don't know a ton about this, but when the electronics turn off to the bike, it kind of like the power valve forgets its setting. And so every time you start the bike, it has to go through like kind of a calibration process to figure out where's fully open, where's fully closed. The problem with that is, and under normal circumstances, when you just start the bike, it will figure that out. And if you're not going immediately, it'll figure it out and you'll never even notice as it warms up. But if you are on a hill climb or on a technical situation and boom, you stall the bike and then you immediately go to hit it again and try to then just jump up something, the power valve is still doing its calibration thing and you've got no low end because it opens all the way up or something. Anyway, don't quote me on all this stuff. I just know that is super annoying because it does its calibration every single time. My dealer knew this, and so they circumvented that by installing an arming switch right here, which if you could hear that, I turned this arming switch on and it has now all the electronics on for the bike. And basically what this does is it means the bike never knows that it's shut off. So if you kill the bike, the electronics to the bike don't shut off and the bike doesn't know it's shut off, so it doesn't go through its resetting of the power valve. I think there's a couple other people that offer similar solutions like this for the TMs, and that is something that you probably need to get if you bought this bike, otherwise you're going to be pretty annoyed. But overall, the power delivery of this thing is amazing if you're not waiting for your electronic power valve to kind of go through its recalibration process. Something I kind of found interesting at first and then annoying later is the way that they've got the kickstand. So they have a little cam thing on here. So when your kickstand goes all the way down and you put pressure on it, it'll stand. But as soon as you take pressure off the kickstand, it will then flip up like that, which sounds kind of cool, except for it's not, because it's just annoying that your kickstand goes up when you don't necessarily want it to. Some people may like that, but it also doesn't come up very high right here. Hopefully, I'll roll in some shots. You've got this little rubber band that you can put down here to kind of, keep this thing from going down. But what I found is I think I would break that band because my boots are constantly coming out and catching on this spring or catching on this when I'm kind of messing around. And I find myself hitting that with the heel of my boot and kind of knocking the kickstand part way down or whatever. So I don't love how this kind of just sits out here totally exposed. I'm glad it has it. I'm glad it has a kickstand, but I think this is kind of dorky. There's a way for you to kind of bypass this and make it so, because I know people are going to yell at me and be like, oh, you can do this and totally change it. Yes, you can. There's a lot of stuff you can change, but I'm not here to review what you can do to change it. I'm just telling you what it's like in its stock form, and I think it's kind of hokey. So yes, there's a solution for this, but it's kind of hokey that we have to do it. Hey, check it out. We've got a Kickstart on the bike. Now, this is something that it's basically gone away from every motorcycle out there. Now it's very rare that a bike is going to have electric start and a kickstart. So this is one of those rare breeds that still has this. All the other bikes have ditched it because they figure they don't need it and they're trying to shave weight on the bikes and also probably shave cost. This one does have a kickstart. I do know several people that are like, I won't buy a bike that doesn't have a kickstart. And so if you're actually one of those people, the TM EN300 ES FI2T is actually going to be on your short list because it's one of the few that still has the kickstart. I'd rather have the backup kickstart than not. I've still never been stranded because I didn't have a kickstart, but it's just nice to know that you do have one on this bike. We mentioned that it's a throttle body fuel injection. I'm on the wrong side of the bike now to talk about this, but it's throttle body fuel injection, which is great. It also has an oil pump, so it's oil injected. So you're putting actual, just regular pump gas right in here, and then you pull off your seat and you've got access to the oil reservoir here. So it does have an oil pump. Now there's a lot of guys that are really scared of these oil pumps, thinking that they're gonna fail all the time. And I'm sure that some of them have failed, whether you have a TM or you had a Beta or you had a KTM. Some of the guys out there probably have had an oil pump failure. I never have with all the bikes that I've had. So I'm not super worried about that. I figure if you just replace the oil pump every time you did a top end, you know, maybe every 100 hours or so, I don't think almost none of us would ever have an issue with that. But it is nice. I do know a lot of people there's a lot of people that don't like oil pumps and they want to mix their gas, but there's also this whole other huge group of people that want to just be able to put pump gas in the bike and not have to worry about mixing oil in the fuel. So this is that middle ground there. It's similar to what KTM is doing on their 24 XCW bikes, where it's throttle body fuel injected, but it's also oil injected with a reservoir. So that's what the TM is also. Let's talk about the brakes. So we've got a Brembo brake up here on the front, which is great. I love the Brembo brakes. I love the feel of that. But then we also, it's an interesting pairing because you've got a Nissan brake back here on the rear. I don't have any problem with that because I don't feel like I have as much feel with a Nissan brake up on the front. So this has the brake I want on the front. The brake on the back, where it's Nissan or Brembo or Brake Tech or whatever, I think they all work, and I don't have enough like dexterity in my foot to tell the difference. But one thing I don't love is this the brake lever. The brake lever here, there's no breakaway on this, which a lot of them don't have, but it just sticks out a little bit further. I've had sticks multiple times get caught right here in this thing, and it might even be bent out slightly more because of that. Ah, look at that, dude. That picked up that big old tree branch. About killed the bike because then it was applying the brake. Get out of there. But I just feel like this, for whatever reason, it seems like things get like kind of tracked in here and get stuck in this. I've killed the bike at least once or twice because a stick got wedged in here and then actuated my brake and cut things off. It's weird because I don't ever remember I can't remember that happening on any of the other bikes that I've ridden, and I've had it happen 2 or 3 times on this one. So there's something about the way that like this is designed where sticks and things get shoved in there, which is an interesting thing. You wouldn't really think that, but that is what I have noticed on this thing. So it's kind of a beefy brake pedal and stuff gets jammed in between there. At least it has for me. Now, some of you guys may get mad at me for saying this, but I do not like it when you have to use a tool to get to your air filter. I find that means that I'm checking air filter. Oh my gosh, I'm checking air filters less and less, and not as much great maintenance is happening. Now look at this. I'm showing you in real time how long it takes to get into the air filter, which I think is a problem. Is this like a deal breaker, a reason not to buy these bikes? No, it's not a reason not to buy the bike, but it's just something to take into consideration. So let's look down in here and see what we can see. Here is my air filter. Here's our oil reservoir. This is fine. I'd rather have this out, but since you're only putting oil in the tank every several tanks of gas, this is fine. But I don't love having to make it so hard to get to my air filter, and this is kind of awkward to get this in and out of here. So, and there's a lot of dead space inside here. I don't know if you can see that well, but there is a lot of dead space down in there. This is where your battery is, and I just don't love this design right here. It's okay, it works, but I wish it was toolless air filter changes. Here's that throttle body we were talking about earlier. The bike runs great, and this is easy to tune, easy to kind of adjust your idle. So no complaints there. Radiators are actually quite exposed on this bike. Talking with the dealer and talking with some other people, they're like, put radiator braces on here immediately. And so I went with these AXP radiator braces. It's got like some back straps that you can maybe kind of see here that come on the side of the radiators, and then they come back and they hook to a mounting point back here. So those are actually pretty cool. I think those are some great radiator braces for this bike, but I do feel like they're pretty dang exposed, radiators, as far as they could get bent very, very easily. Let's take a look at our KYB forks here. Again, I think they're too stiff. I think this valving on this KYB fork is too stiff for hard enduro and like the type of stuff that this bike is designed for. Unless this bike is designed to do cross-country super fast racing, that is too stiff. That is my opinion. So again, but also I love the rims on this thing. We've got Excel Takasago rims. They look super trick with the blue. That looks absolutely amazing. I really, really love that. I do not love the Cyclops headlight. This thing is super ugly, and if this was my bike, I would either probably take that off and just put a regular number plate on there, or get some other type of a headlight that works that doesn't look super weird. So they come with HGS pipes. I've got no problem with the pipe. The pipe is cool, the pipe is good. You do have a standard glue-on grip, hand grips on these things. I would probably end up swapping this out for a lock-on grip. I don't love glue-on grips anymore, but that is a thing. They do come kind of like all wired up, and possibly for being street legal. So your kill switch is here. I had this on a beta before. Your kill switch is over here on your left finger. So I always kind of have to remember that. This is the horn, which was taken off the bike, or at least not installed from the factory. This is, headlight off, low, and high. So there aren't blinkers on this bike, but that was because the dealer took those off to begin with. It's kind of hard to see what the oil is. I kept wondering if I was getting low on oil, but my oil is actually above these little things. So once your oil gets lower, you should be able to see it down here. This is the proprietary shock that they have. It was a Bearcat to set the sag on this thing. It is hard to get in here. There's no room to get in there to get that thing set. So it's like, you can barely see back in there. Maybe you can't see like the ring to, the locking ring back in there, the locking nut on that. This was the hardest bike to set sag I have ever been around, because there's just no room in there. Again, it's kind of a design, it's kind of a factor of how the frame is designed, which is a cool frame and it's a cool bike, but everything is so tight in there with the way that it's designed, it was very hard to set sag. Obviously, you do have linkage here on the bike. The stock skid plate did not cover the linkage, so we put an AXP Extreme skid plate on this thing to come down here and cover the linkage and protect our suspension back here as well. I ended up going with an AS3 Performance rear skid plate on this bike. Rear disc guard to protect my Galfer disc. So they've got some really cool components on this. Excel rims, KYB forks, Galfer brakes, Brembo brakes, the Nissan brakes and things like that, but they're making a ton of the other stuff in-house. They make the frame in-house, they make the swing arms in-house, they make, they make the shock. The whole shock is something that they make themselves. Obviously, they're not making the fork, but they're making so many of the other things. I think they even make their plastics. While we're on the subject of plastics and graphics, I haven't ridden this bike that much, and graphics are already coming off of it. So they started to come off within the first ride, and I've just been very careful to kind of keep them on as long as possible, because it is a sweepstakes bike, and I want the rider want the owner to at least see what this stuff looked like in its stock form. So even things like the sprocket, they make the sprocket. They make so many of the components. Most of the stuff on this bike they make in-house, which I think is cool. You're getting like a custom-built motorcycle. It's like a hand-built motorcycle in a lot of ways. So it's just different than a lot of the other things out there. Overall, it's a triple as far as I don't know that it's a home run, but it's definitely a triple if we're taking this to baseball terms. So those are some of my thoughts about the TM EN300 ES FI2T. This is the sweepstakes bike here in the month of June. Get your entries to win this sucker. Also, there's a KTM 300 XCW that is up for grabs. So 2 people are gonna win bikes in June of 2023, and that's pretty dang cool. This is a great bike. Is it the favorite bike I've ever had? No, it's not. But it's a great bike out there, and if you're I don't have bad things to say about it. It's just that man, there have been so many TM owners over the years that have just ranted and raved about it. And I try to go into every review with an even keel. And I think I did that here. But still, there was a little bit of just it's awesome to have in your shop, and it's different looking, and it's all these things. But then you go ride it and you're like, it's great, but it didn't feel like, it didn't light me up and super excite me. So anyway, and some of you guys are gonna be pissed off to hear me say that, but I never really was excited about it. And I think that if the forks had been a little bit softer, if the shock had been a little bit softer, it might have made a little bit of a difference. But that was just what I thought about it. So anyway, if you like these videos, please use my links to Rocky Mountain ATV. You can go to my website, dirtbikechannel.com, and then you click on Shop Rocky Mountain ATV. If you're clicking on that link, you're literally helping this channel continue to do this. There are not very many reviews on bikes like this, and that's because you're clicking on the link and making it possible for me to actually just go out there and buy a $12,000 motorcycle and then offer it up as a review and then offer it up as a sweepstakes bike. So thank you from the bottom of my heart if you're doing that, if you're using those links. If you've entered the sweepstakes, we usually, this year I'm doing one, I did one in March, we're doing one here in June. I'm planning on doing another one in September and then another one at the end of the year in December. So that's what's going on. Get your entries for this thing. Sorry, if you're a TM guy and you were just expecting me to just like boil over love and affection for this thing, I'm just telling you how I feel. I'm just keeping it real. I paid full price for this thing. I like it, didn't love it. For the reasons that we talked about earlier, but pretty cool stuff. Trip computer. We didn't even really talk about the map switch, and that's because I think map switches on two strokes are pretty hokey. I haven't really seen one that I thought. There's just like one of the maps the bike runs the best it can, and the next map the bike runs kind of doggy. 4 strokes is different, but on the two strokes, that's kind of what it is. And this has a map switch, and I think it's pretty much a gimmick. But I think that on all the 2-stroke map switches that I've seen, Husky, KTM, Husky, you know, Beta, all of them, don't love the softer maps on any of these bikes. So that's what I've got for you. Make sure you get entered to win. Grab yourself a hat. I always do that. A hat, a shirt, tie downs, whatever you got. Look, I'm doing all earth tones today. So except for the shoes. The shoes are black, but I've got earth tone pants, earth tone shirt, earth tone hat. Look, I even shaved. My head's probably pretty shiny today. Okay. That's the TM EN300 ES FI2T. And until next time, leave a single track.